Hi there, and welcome back to another episode of Red Spark's Crypto Blog for your Cardano and crypto related news. Today, we're going to be continuing the discussion on scalability, as it's quite a hot topic right now. I was hoping to cover some other items of news, but that will have to wait till tomorrow. But before I dive into that, a quick look at the market. And as we can see, altcoins have been rallying, in particular 13.6% increase for Solana and 8.2% for Cardano. So that's great to see. Scrolling down, it's pretty much the same across the board. I guess they're not quite as high as those two, but we see 6.1% for Polygon, 3.8% for Uniswap. So it looks like some of the more, I guess, blue chip altcoins are back in the fray now. It's a shame Algorand didn't pump a little bit harder and Chainlink hasn't pumped at all. So I feel like those two are due for a larger pump. I did buy into Chainlink recently, in fact a few hours ago, so I'm hoping that this will pump. And Algorand I've had for a little while. One new coin that I finally got my hands on is Koti. I sold a little bit of my ADA to purchase the Koti. I finally managed to get it through crypto.com, and an experience that I'm sure a lot of you out there can relate to. The moment I sold my ADA is when it decided to pump 8%. And after I decided to buy Koti dumped a couple more percentages. However, thankfully, I realized this morning that I'd already purchased a little bit of Koti, not the full amount that I had wanted. So I was able to pick up most of my Koti at the lower price. But nevertheless, I did miss out on that Cardano pump for the amount that I sold. But hey, that is the trading experience for most of us average retail investors out there, and that's why we should just tend to hodl and not try and get too clever about these things. So in yesterday's video, we took a look at Hydra and some of the questions that were posed around it, in particular whether it could handle the demand from DEXs. I was hoping to cover other topics today, and perhaps non-Cardano topics, but the scalability issue is running hot right now in the Cardano community, and rightly so as well. It is an important topic. And there was a really good video posted by Rick McCracken of Digital Fortress on his channel, in which he had a conversation with Sebastian and Nico Aqueros, both from DC Spark. And they did a great job laying out what the challenges were for scalability, both in the near term and the long term for Cardano. So that's what we're going to go through. If you haven't seen the video, I highly recommend watching it. It was refreshing to have a more honest discussion about Cardano, rather than the positive spin you might see in pretty much every other Cardano video out there. So I've put together this pictorial to help understand how the Cardano blockchain mechanism works. What we have is a node at the very bottom there. So nodes are essentially your stake pool operators. And I've deliberately chosen a picture of a Raspberry Pi there to show that within the Cardano platform, we do try and keep the system requirements quite low. So we want it to run on a low grade machine if possible, rather than Solana, which requires 128 gigabytes of RAM. And that constraint is something that we might want to examine. So what happens is whenever you construct a transaction, that transaction gets sent to a node and it sits in the mempool. So at the very top, we have a memory pool, and you can see that all the different transactions are just chilling out, waiting in the mempool until they get selected for a block. So the mempool has a size of 128 kilobytes. A single transaction can be up to 16 kilobytes, depending on what they contain. Usually it'll be a lot smaller than that for NFTs, for example, but a complex Pluto script might max out the 16 kilobytes. But they're all hanging out by the pool, and then the node will select these transactions to go into a block. A block can be up to 64 kilobytes, and it's allowed up to 1 second for processing. So if you imagine within this block, you've got all these different transactions of different levels of complexity. The maximum amount of time allowed to go through each of those transactions within that block is 1 second. But it usually takes just a few milliseconds to process an entire block, and therefore you can cram in multiple blocks per second. And then that's how you get up to 11 transactions per second, which is the current limit of the Cardano blockchain. Now, here are some of the points that Sebastian made. He said currently the Cardano blockchain is operating at 6 transactions per second. So I think what he means by that is the current demand is only so much that there's only 6 transactions per second needing to be processed. But he said that that demand could 3x in a few months, which will start to cause delays. I wasn't quite clear why he said 3x and not 2x, because if you double the 6, you get to 11 TPS, which is what the current limits are. But perhaps he meant due to the other optimizations that are taking place, you could probably eke out some more performance. So really, it's when demand 3x's, which is likely to do in a couple of months when dexes are out, that you're really going to be reaching that limit of what the current parameters can handle. He said the Hydra solution was far away and does require more research, and I covered that in yesterday's channel. So version 1, the proof of concept of Hydra to be launched in Q1 next year is going to be very limited. It's not really going to help DEXs, and it's only when they research and develop multiple heads per Hydra node that it could potentially help DEXs. And even then, there was the question of needing ZK rollups for a truly effective solution. So that's going to be quite far away, and we do need a solution in the short term. We're making a whole bunch of optimizations, but realistically, in a couple of months, we could be maxing out what the level 1 chain is currently capable of handling. And that's why Sebastian is asking the question, well, how do you deal with transactions in that context? His suggestion is we deploy a fee-based approach to prioritize transactions. So the current architecture within Cardano has got a fee-based system sort of built in. There's a base fee that we will pay, and then there's a tip amount which currently isn't being utilized, but it could get utilized if we want to implement a fee-based approach. Rick did ask him, well, how long would it take to implement that as a solution, should we need to? The answer wasn't necessarily clear or great. What Sebastian said was reaching agreement within the community could take a while in itself, the CIP process. But let's say the CIP could be agreed within a month, then the next challenge is IOHK as a bottleneck, waiting for them to then implement the solution, as opposed to needing to have more development teams outside of IOHK operating within the Cardano landscape. So Sebastian was quite big on this idea that we just need to have more independent organizations developing Cardano. It wasn't just down to IOHK anymore. But I wasn't entirely clear on, let's say IOHK agreed to develop a fee-based approach. Would it take them that long? How long would it take, given that they're familiar with Cardano? He also said that because Cardano is deterministic, i.e. you know in advance whether or not a transaction will pass, so you only submit a transaction that is going to pass, then it means in a Cardano fee-based system, you're not going to get wasted transaction fees like you get in Ethereum. Some other interesting points he raised, why not just increase the transactions per second allowed from 11 to something higher, which is one idea that's been floated around. If you do that, then you're going to have greater requirements on your node. So you're going to be moving away from being able to run on a Raspberry Pi to needing something more like a Solana-based solution. I think that warrants a good debate, because in reality, I think we're already on the edges of whether or not a Raspberry Pi could be used for this. I think most SPOs would not be running this on a Raspberry Pi. And the 8 gigabytes memory requirement that we have right now is still a long, long way away from the 128 gigabytes that Solana uses. So I certainly think we should be asking, should we be expecting our node operators to have at least 16 gigabytes or maybe 32 gigabytes of memory? Some other points that Sebastian raised was that a number of important projects related to scalability and infrastructure upgrades failed to get the necessary funding in the last Catalyst round. He made the point that there was a lot of money spent on AI-related projects, and that a lot of those projects were actually related to Singularity.net. So one specific project building on Cardano got a lion's share of funding. And I think actually it was Nico that made this point, so correction there. And I think that's a totally fair point. Whilst AI might sound cool, and it's a subject that I do know something about, I do agree that AI with blockchain is very early days right now and certainly should not be the biggest priority for Cardano. And so this then raises a question of whether or not Catalyst is suitable for funding long-running infrastructure projects. For example, ZK rollups will take a lot of effort and talent is hard to come by. So should it be down to a team trying to constantly get funding every couple of months to stay alive, who are doing a ZK rollups implementation? There are other funding mechanisms within Cardano for that sort of thing, but we do need other teams beyond IOHK able to deliver. And Sebastian by no means was saying that it should be DC Spark that deliver these things. He was quite clear that they've already got quite a lot on their plate. So that's really all the key points. Raised more questions than it offered solutions, for sure. But it is a valid discussion that we should be thinking about and having within the Cardano community. So I did appreciate them bringing up the points. I haven't yet determined what my own takeaways are. I do think perhaps we should loosen requirements that our nodes should be able to run on something fairly low grade without necessarily going overboard in the other direction. I think from my research in the last day or two, it does look like we need to get a team looking into ZK rollups. And it probably would make sense that this team is separate from the Hydra team within IOHK. And as for the fee-based approach, I think I want more clarity from IOHK first as to whether or not we're going to be maxing out the current capacity of the network in a couple of months. I do find that Charles and IOHK seem to always paint a very rosy picture of things, and I'm having to go through all of their videos and updates and documentation with a magnifying glass to try and figure out what's really happening behind the scenes. So that's it from me. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and I'd love to hear your views on all this in the comments below. Or go to the Twitter thread from Sebastian and feel free to comment down there. To end on a good note, I just saw that IOHK have released or tweeted out that the PAB is getting close to being finished. So it looks like the actual coding work is pretty much done now, and now it's getting ready for integration into the wallet backend and launching on mainnet. I did have some other Cardano and crypto news that I wanted to cover, but it'll have to wait till tomorrow. Other than that, I hope you all have a great day.